There's nothing quite as satisfying as a great character arc. I mean, when you like a character, it just makes sense that you'd want to see them grow, conquer their fears and faults, and become a better person. Such growth often occurs naturally in long-running dramatic stories, ones with high stakes and/or grand adventures. However, I've found that a compelling arc can happen anywhere, even in the most comedic and episodic forms of storytelling. There are a few examples that come to mind, but perhaps my favorite is Korvo from Solar Opposites. Korvo is a particularly interesting case because his character development is both fairly drastic and highly connected with the show's premise. That is, a team of aliens trying to figure out life on Earth. In summary, Korvo goes from caring primarily about his alien mission and trying to fix the ship.
Can repair our spaceship?
I don't know, Korvo. Can nickel alloy catch a frisbee in the air?
We won't know until we get some. You know, sometimes it feels like I'm the only Schlorpian who wants to escape this garbage planet.
To neglecting the mission to begrudgingly try to fit in on Earth.
Today I realized that each of you has been fulfilling your mission roles in convoluted ways because I hadn't created an environment where my team could thrive. I should have set down roots on Earth, found a work-life balance instead of repairing the doggone ship all the time.
To unabashedly loving Earth.
But I thought you wanted to complete the mission. That's like your whole thing.
That Zark guy was full of shit. Sure, he got the mission done in record time, but we aren't just cogs in a Schlorpian machine. We're guiding the pupa, but we're also learning a lot from living on Earth. We found out about love, the Criterion Collection, paintball, NASCAR, and Top Girl.
Oh, love Tub Girl.
All these beautiful things that Schlorpians would benefit from knowing. They aren't in the pupa's record of the home world. How many planet Schlorps have existed where nothing's different? Why do we keep replicating it to be the same when it could be the same but also better?
Not to mention the show shifting from being about a pair of diametrically opposed aliens, opposites if you will, to a wholesome married couple raising their family on Earth. How did we get here? How did Korvo's character develop so drastically over 5 seasons? How does this affect the show as a whole? And most importantly, why does it work? The key, I believe, is that Korvo's goals and actions change dramatically, but his core desires stay the same. What do I mean by core desires? These are the motivations, often unbeknownst to the character, that fundamentally drive their inner conflict. An important element of these is that they are present from the start and continue throughout the story. For Korvo, I've identified 2 desires that I think are central to his character. 1, he cares about his team/family. 2, he genuinely likes Earth. You might be thinking, hey, doesn't the family abandon each other like every other episode? And doesn't Korvo start literally every episode by complaining about how terrible Earth is? You're absolutely right. And that's why it works. Korvo's core desires are in conflict with his perceived goals, and that is what leads to character growth. If you know anything about character work, this might sound familiar. Yes, indeed, this is basically the same principle as wants versus needs. This is best explained by author and story theorist K.M. Weiland.
At its simplest, the thing your character wants is the plot goal. Usually the want is part of a bigger picture, a desire or goal that existed prior to the specific conflict of your story's second act, but it will funnel directly into your character's plot goal. In any kind of change arc, the want shows the lie the character believes in action. Within the character's inner life, the lie has created either a hole or a block. It is preventing the character from growing toward health. It may even be actively pushing him toward mental or moral sickness.
Let's apply this to Korvo. His want is to uphold his Schlorpian duty, which results in his plot goals, to fix the ship and to complete the mission. This is based upon his lie, which is that his service to Schlorp is his ultimate purpose. Characters' wants and lies are, of course, pitted against their needs and truths.
Whereas the want is a direct equivalent of the plot goal, the thing the character needs is a direct correlative of the thematic value. Whatever truth your story is positing about reality, that is the ultimate thing the character needs. The need is always available to the character. It's often a simplistic antidote to the character's inner pain and conflict. But the character is confused, usually because the want realistically seems to offer the correct solution to her problem. And yet, no matter how difficult or pyrrhic it might be to pursue and accept the need, the character will never find health or wholeness without it. Ultimately, the truth and need represent a resolution of the inner conflict.
Thanks, K.M. Weiland. Back to Korvo. I've already established his needs, that he must embrace both his team/family and Earth. And following Weiland's framework, we can figure that this is based on his truth, that his family and life on Earth are more valuable than his duty to Schlorp. Now, there's something to note about Weiland's framework here. It is primarily applied to and designed for traditional plots and serialized stories. But that's not what we're really dealing with here. Nonetheless, I think this framework can still be considered in more episodic situations. After all, wants always drive characters and conflicts, regardless of the type of story being told. The difference is that, in episodic stories, plots, dynamics, and motivations are repeated to the point that they become familiar. It is here that you get episodic formulas. That is, every episode follows the same structure based on predictable characters and motivations. Often, in order to follow their formula, characters must remain static. In Weiland's terms, their needs will never be fulfilled and their wants will always stay the same. Sometimes this is even by design. And this isn't a bad thing. On the contrary, this can be extremely effective. Static characters are sustainable. Following a formula can mean that there is no end to the number of stories that can be told with a single cast or setting, since writers don't have to change or complicate the status quo. But this can be a double-edged sword. The same premises that are reliable can also be limiting. The traits that make characters predictable can be the same ones that limit them. But back to the topic at hand. Solar Opposites seems to have an episodic formula, at least at first. Episodes go more or less like this. Korvo is minding his own business, usually working on the ship or doing his best to complete the mission. Something, usually Earth or Terry related, distracts him. He uses sci-fi technology to pursue the distraction, which inadvertently ends up causing more problems. Then, usually working together as a couple or as a family, Korvo solves whatever problem that was happening in the episode, learning some sort of lesson about himself or his connection with his family. This formula is followed for the first 2 seasons of the show, and through it all, Korvo's wants remain pretty much the same. However, by season 3, the writers had a decision to make. Do they keep the characters static, sticking with the status quo, or do they let the characters change, risking the formula and premise of the show changing with them? As you already know, they chose the latter. So, after 2 seasons of supposedly prioritizing the mission, but learning repeated lessons about the value of family, Korvo finally shifts his priorities. Instead of continuously trying to fix the ship and complete the mission, his attention becomes focused on fitting in on Earth. In other words, his wants change as he grows more aware of his needs. Even the show is aware of this shift in behavior, poking fun at it multiple times in later seasons.
Now that I'm not focusing on the mission or fixing the ship, I'm free to do whatever I want.
You're still hung up on that? We're not serialized. Like that big weird face on the wall? We've never set that up.
Mission? Huh, 2020 called it wants its stakes back.
It's a classic Korvo meltdown. You guys should have seen it. Total season 1 shit.
I've seen some people say that the series goes downhill after this point, or that the change is unnecessary, or that it comes out of nowhere and is too drastic. And I disagree. If anything, I believe Korvo's character arc ends up making the show more compelling. A change like this could have been poorly done, but it's built up organically because all the seeds are planted from the start. From the pilot, Korvo loves his family and loves Earth.
Hey, Korv, you think you're starting to warm up to Earth a little?
I must admit, with Funbucket around, repairing the ship has lost a little bit of urgency.
Oh my god, you're gonna make me cry.
Maybe trapped on this world that's on the brink of mass extinction, plagued by a species that destroys the environment, but while we're here, breathing in the disgusting poison, air, at least we have each other. I could not replace you with 1,000,000 Funbuckets.
These elements of his character never change, and by making his growth gradual and character-based, progress ends up being both natural and satisfying. As we've seen, Korvo's growth is basically a perfect execution of Wyland's positive change arc. Korvo begins with strong wants based on his lie, then learns to embrace his truth, gradually fulfilling his needs and growing as a character. Also, even with his character growth, I really don't think the episodic formula changes all that much. Sure, Terry and Korvo work as a unit a lot in the later seasons, meaning they're not really opposites, but they work together a lot in the early episodes too. The episodes are still ultimately about aliens figuring out life on Earth as a family, with sci-fi chaos along the way. Plus, as an added bonus, Korvo's arc ends up supporting other big developments during the show's run. Even though it wasn't planned for, I think the Season 4 voice change actually works well when considered in the context of Korvo's character. Over the course of the show, Korvo is less characterized by his frustrations with living on Earth, and more characterized by his sensitivity and affection for his family. Dan Stevens' performance is considerably more equipped to play this new, more emotional Korvo compared to Justin Roiland's. But perhaps the other biggest development over the course of the show is the romantic relationship between Terry and Korvo. They go from being platonic teammates and kind of co-parents to literally getting married, having a honeymoon, and being extremely intimate on screen. People who say their relationship came out of nowhere weren't paying attention. Not only does it develop bit by bit and season by season, it's perfectly in line with Korvo's character arc. The biggest things that separate Korvo and Terry are their feelings about Earth and the mission. But as Korvo pursues the mission less seriously and learns more about Earth, it makes perfect sense that he and Terry would grow closer. Terry represents an embrace of Earth culture. As Korvo begins to love Earth, so too does he begin to love Terry. Ultimately, what makes Solar Opposites special to me is that it trusts its characters. When given the decision between its formula and change, the writers chose change. They understand that Korvo is not characterized by his flaws and frustrations, but by the bonds he builds and the lessons he learns about himself and his home. They give the space for Korvo to develop, letting his wants shift and his needs to endure, allowing for a satisfying character arc that became the beating heart of the series. And all of this results in a show that, despite its absolute insanity, is ultimately about family, acceptance, and growth. And that's why I love it. Thanks so much for watching. I mostly made this as a summer bucket list activity. I love video essays and fiction analysis, and really just wanted to gush about one of my favorite shows, so I figured this would be a fun project to try before the academic year starts up again. Anyways, I'm super hyped about Season 6. Depending what happens in that season, I might make some sort of follow-up to this video, but I suppose we'll see. If you haven't somehow watched Solar Opposites at this point, please do. My analysis absolutely doesn't capture how hilarious this show is, not to mention the incredible side plots. Also, shout out to KM Wyland. Along with the blog post / podcast I used, I would also strongly recommend giving her book a read if you care at all about storytelling. Anyways, thanks again for watching.